Hello, and welcome to Stephen Neidle's talk on Rosalind Franklin. Just to introduce Stephen for a moment, he took his PhD on the structure of tryptamine and has worked ever since on drug discovery. He was chair of biophysics at the Institute of Cancer Research and became first chair of chemical biology at UCL School of Pharmacy. So without any further ado, I asked Stephen to start his talk on Rosalind Franklin, the first nucleic acid crystallographer. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for inviting me to this wonderful meeting. Good afternoon, everybody. My subject today, Rosalind Franklin, is somewhat different from all the other personalities that you've heard about today and will be hearing about. First of all, Rosalind was the only person who has never held a substantive university post. She was a research fellow and a research assistant. Yet in a few years, she's managed to capture the public imagination by what she did in science. She is also, was also, unfortunately, taken from us at a very early age. So none of us here, I don't think, have had the pleasure of actually meeting Rosalind. So Rosalind lived just 38 years, and as you can see from the right-hand side, she spent some time in Paris. Her career will be summarized in the first part of this talk. Then in the second part, I'm going to focus more on what she did in science, in particular, what she did in the DNA field. Her background was that she was the daughter of a well-established intellectual family. So going to Cambridge, reading natural sciences, starting just before the war, was something that was not alien to her family. After her tripos degree, she started a PhD in physical chemistry. Unfortunately, that ended very quickly. Her supervisor, Norrish, was, I'm afraid, an inveterate drinker, and her PhD never really got off the ground. So in 1942, she left and worked at the British Coal Utilisation Research Association, and also started on a PhD on the physical chemistry of aspects of coal. And that work defined what she did in a few subsequent years, working on the X-ray crystallography of amorphous solids, which became her area of speciality, her area of expertise, and very considerable expertise. During that time in France, she produced a number of single author papers, including 3 in Acta Crystallographica. From 51 to 53, she was at King's College London, as I'll detail in a few minutes. And for the rest of her short career, she moved to Birkbeck College in London. So it's well known that Rosalind had a Turner and Newell Fellowship when she worked at King's College. I'm going to go into some detail about this fellowship because it turns out that the detail is all important for understanding the subsequent events and turn of events at King's. These fellowships were part of a small group of fellowships that the University of London and other universities were granted from the mid-1940s right through to the early 1970s. These were fellowships awarded by ICI and Turner and Newell, at that time 2 of the largest UK industrial conglomerates. They weren't fellowships that were attached to any part of ICI or Turner and Newell business, but they were meant to recognize high achievement, a high promise in those who were awarded. So applicants had to find a host laboratory and a sponsor. These were prestigious awards and not at all to be confused with research assistants. These were awards in which the successful applicants would have their own research project, would be allowed to get on with it and develop their career. Now, Rosalind was encouraged to apply in 1950 for these awards to the Federal University of London, and after some discussion with several people, including the theoretical chemist Charles Coulson, she decided to apply to work in the then new biophysics unit at King's College, and the director of that unit, J.T. Grandel, was her sponsor. So, to give you some flavor of the application, most of it was concerned with background and achievements, and she focused on her achievements in applying rigorous crystallography to coal and graphite science. She put that into 3 pages, highly compressed text, and her own future research program was just summarized in 16 lines, very, very brief summary of what she wanted to do. And as you can see from the quote at the bottom, she'd very much enjoyed her 3 years in France, but wanted to come back and work in the UK, particularly in London. The application was a multi-tier one in terms of how it was assessed. There are a large number of applicants, 154 at the outset, and these were whittled down finally to a short list of 9, all of whom were interviewed by the committee, and Rosalind and 3 others were offered fellowships in June 1950. We don't know why she was given the Turner and Newell Award, maybe because of some thought that coal research was in somehow relevant more to Turner and Newell than to ICI. But since there was no contact between her and Turner and Newell during her tenure of the fellowship, this was really rather academic. I should say that the committee appointing her had no industrial representation at all, purely senior academics from across the University of London, of which J.T. Randall was one. So, having been awarded the fellowship, she joined King's some 6 months later at the beginning of 1951. And the 2 key players in the biophysics unit were, as you can see here, Sir John Randall, subsequently Sir John, the head of the physics department and director of the MRC biophysics unit. His second in command was Maurice Wilkins, assistant director of the biophysics unit. They had worked together over many years. Maurice Wilkins was at that time very much a wet lab worker, very hands-on. The question that I'm going to pose and hopefully answer was, why was the relationship between Rosalind Franklin so fraught? It's been extremely well documented that this was the case in numerous biographies of Rosalind Franklin, in numerous accounts of the discovery of the structure of DNA. This is always highlighted and a key aspect of why Rosalind's reputation is so high and why she is considered to have been a victim of the circumstances at the time at King's College. It's clear the tension and discord was with Maurice Wilkins, who was the other serious worker on DNA at the college. And I think it's fair to say that history has not been kind to Morris. He's been put up as the villain of the piece numerous times. It's fair to say that their personalities were very different. I knew Maurice Wilkins well. I myself was at King's College between 1972 and 1985, and his personality was such that the last thing you'd think of was this was a difficult, combative person. But why were the relationships so bad? In the Anna Sayre biography, she highlights this issue, but offers no real insight into why it was so. I've already mentioned her fellowship, and the project that she put into that application was a project on diffraction studies of proteins in solution. But it wasn't until 6 months after she was awarded the fellowship that Randall, in a well-documented letter to her in December of that year, suggested, didn't impose, but merely suggested that she switch to working on DNA because this was a more active area in the biophysics unit. And in that letter, he outlined some of what was being done at King's on nucleic acids, but critically did not mention, except in passing, that Maurice Wilkins had been active in the area. Indeed, Maurice had started the work at King's on DNA. So reading the letter now and then, one would think that Wilkins was no longer working on X-ray studies of DNA structure, which was not the case. So she joined King's in January 1951, not as a research assistant, as Wilkins had been led to believe. In prior discussions with Randall, they'd agreed that the DNA effort required further expertise, and that Rosalind Franklin was going to join Wilkins' group to provide that expertise. But she came, as we've seen, as an independent worker, and would have assumed from what Randall told her that she was the sole senior worker on the project. Somewhat surprisingly, she was not a member of King's College staff. There's no record of her being on the staff lists at the time, and one can surmise that she was probably employed directly by the Federal University, who granted her the fellowship. So she started at King's, no indication on her part that she'd be competing with Maurice Wilkins to determine the structure of DNA. So both of them were ignorant of the other's status and role. And one can imagine that this was immediately going to produce tensions and upset, confusion. And that's what happened. Both of them were victims. And so it's no wonder that Franklin, in her 2 years at King's, was unhappy at the circumstance that she found herself in. And I think in retrospect, it's now very clear that not only was Rosalind treated dishonestly by her supposed mentor, but that Maurice Wilkins was also mistreated and manipulated by him. And it's difficult to think that Randall didn't know what was going to happen. I think he was being extraordinarily manipulative, but the question is, why did he do this? I think he believed that the approach of Wilkins, together with the theoretician Alex Stokes at King's, to the DNA problem would not reveal its structure, even though they had previously determined helical parameters for the A form of DNA. So they'd had some significant success already. But Randall, knowing full well Rosalind's background from her fellowship applications, from discussions. He probably thought that Rosalind's more formal crystallographic skills would be essential. Wilkins was not a crystallographer, he was a biophysicist, and his knowledge of crystallography was certainly at that time not deep. I guess he also thought, looking at the past history of the relationship between the two, that Wilkins would kowtow to what he said and relinquish the DNA project, even though he'd been working in on it and started it for over 3 years previously. But Wilkins did not hand over the project. So this created clearly further tensions, and from his perspective, one can understand why. Ironically, despite what I think was Randall's likely intent, a key part of the subsequent success of the subsequent structure determination was not so much due to Rosalind's emphasis on the use of formal crystallography, the Patterson approach, but rather her main contribution, a crucial contribution, was understanding the role of water and humidity in controlling DNA structure and structure transitions. She exploited that in obtaining and analyzing high-quality fiber diffraction patterns for both the A and B forms of DNA, and she was able to define the difference. Now, these high-quality diffraction patterns were the key to the subsequent structure determination by Watson and Crick. Now, we can see on the left-hand side here two X-ray diffraction patterns. The top left is the somewhat fuzzy, but still clearly a diffraction pattern obtained by Wilkins and his then student Raymond Gosling in 1950 at King's. This was the A form that Wilkins and his collaborator Alex Stokes were able to analyze in terms of helical parameters, no more than that. But they did, as I've just indicated, define the structure as likely being a helix from that. The work at King's was not the only diffraction work on DNA at that time. Bill Asprey at Leeds, who was adept at analyzing, or at least obtaining diffraction data from a variety of biological materials, particularly fibers, he and his collaborators obtained this pattern in 1951, which we now recognize as a rather fuzzy bDNA pattern. And we can see the subsequent one that Franklin and Raymond Gosling obtained in 1951, just a year later. I don't think they're at all aware of what was happening at King's, but the superior quality of this pattern enabled them to determine the helical parameters for bDNA, and it was clear to Watson and Crick, particularly Crick, I think, that this was a diffraction pattern from a regular helix. And in particular, the strong diffraction at 3.4 angstroms defined the distance between helical repeats, whatever they were. And of course, these turned out to be base pairs. So as a result of the successful insights of Watson and Crick, 3 papers were published simultaneously in Nature. And on the left-hand side, we can see Rosalind Franklin's and Raymond Gosling's paper in that group of 3. It highlights the bDNA structure and details of it. Later on that year, she published a second paper in Nature, which was really more to do with the A form and the analysis by Patterson methods. Unfortunately, Patterson methods are great for proteins where there's a single dominant atom, a heavy metal atom, for example. But in the case of a nucleic acid, they're inherently incapable of determining fine molecular structure. However, I think Rosalind squeezed the technique as far as it could go and obtained very useful information on the A form. Her other two more extensive DNA papers were published in 1953, this very important paper, which is still cited, on the influence of water structure. And as well as describing her work in detail on the water arrangement and the control of humidity, it also speculated on the possible role of water in maintaining DNA structure. A very important paper. The second paper was a detailed paper about the work on Patterson function. An important paper, but I think it doesn't compare with the one above it in terms of long-term impact. The DNA double helix was, of course, a concept or model, and only much later on, in 1980, was it independently validated by single crystal structures without the presumption of a model. And this is the structure determined by Dixon and colleagues, showing precisely the B-form double helix in exquisite detail. What that structure also disclosed was the role of water. And here on the right-hand side, we can see the double helix in mauve and green, surrounded by large numbers of red water molecules, which play important functional roles in preserving the integrity of the helix. Very much in concept as Rosalind envisaged many years beforehand. After 2 years at King's, after 2 years of, I think, personal difficulty, Rosalind decided to move over to Birkbeck College, and she still had 1 year of her terminal renewal fellowship to run. She worked in part in collaboration with Aaron Klug and Ken Holmes, and this work switched from pure nucleic acids to nucleic acid protein complexes in viruses, determining virus structures. Although that work was not able to determine the molecular structures of viruses, it certainly laid the ground for subsequent successes in this area, not least by Aaron Klug. So again, a single author paper by Rosalind in Nature, and here she discloses an X-ray structure, an X-ray diagram, of tobacco mosaic virus as a gel. And for those of you who are crystallographers, you can see the extraordinary level of diffraction detail in this X-ray picture, testament to Rosalind's skills in the laboratory, in the X-ray laboratory. So let's look a little bit before we finish at what she accomplished in really a few small years. Clearly, she was unafraid to tackle exceptionally difficult problems: DNA structure, virus structure. She was a very talented experimental and computational crystallographer who understood the details of approaches such as the Patterson approach. and clearly played a key role in the double helix story, even though she had a very uncomfortable 2 years at King's. Her ability to obtain high-quality diffraction data was clearly a key element of the success of the structure of determination. Ironically, again, her more quantitative, crystallographically driven approach was later adopted by King's in their detailed validation of DNA and RNA double helical structures, which extended over a number of years right through to the late 1960s, and was very important in really nailing down the details of A and B form DNA structures. But we mustn't forget that her highly successful virus crystallography work at Birkbeck, which produced 17 publications, was really also seminal, and in my view, if she'd lived beyond 1968, she would have been a very worthy partner in the award of the Nobel Prize that Aaron Klug was awarded some years later. So, interestingly, on her tombstone, there's no mention of DNA, but of her virus work. And that's perhaps appropriate. It moves beyond those difficult 2 years and commemorates some of her very long-lasting achievements. Finally, I want to thank a number of people, the archivists at the University of London and King's College, who gave me access to some really very important information. And I'm grateful to others for helpful comment and advice. A more detailed description of the conflict at King's is now available online in an article in Nature Reviews Chemistry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for a most interesting talk with many fascinating details. We're really grateful that you were willing to share your research with us. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this talk. And once again, Stephen, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I'm just pausing for a moment to make it easy to edit at the end. So thank you very much for that, Stephen. It worked perfectly. I hope the recording is okay. I'll check that in a moment. The good thing is it's on my own computer, so I'm not depending on anybody else here. And what more can I say? But thank you for agreeing to do it yet again. So I'm sorry that was necessary, but I have to say I'm not very pleased with the video company. But there you go. They did a good job on the day, and that's what we're mainly there for. So anyway, so any comments?
Not really. I look forward to meeting again at a subsequent meeting of the historical group.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Yes, I mean to come along.
Really, very, very interesting work.
Okay, well, thank you.
Enjoyed being there.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen.
Thanks. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye. I end the meeting now.